In the midst of the soldiers preparing to enter the battlefield, a girl gave the order to attack, drawing her sword as she rode her horse and slashed through every enemy in her path, leaving only a sea of corpses. Amidst the destruction, Vorn was the only survivor, witnessing the devastation brought by the 7th Vanadis who slaughtered everyone Vorn loved. When Vorn finally found the girl in an unguarded moment, he decided to risk his life. This was the only way for the deaths of his loved ones not to be in vain. With only 4 arrows left in his quiver, he shot 2 of them and managed to neutralize the enemies on the front lines. The girl then activated mana energy in her sword, leapt from her fallen horse, and charged at Vorn. As she deflected his 3rd arrow, Vorn released his final shot. However, she cut down the arrow before it could reach its target. With her sword pointed directly at his face, the girl introduced herself as Valteria Eleonora and claimed that Vorn now belonged to her. The next morning, Vorn woke up with the sword's tip pressed against his neck by a girl. Despite a faint hope of trading roles, the reality that he was now a prisoner hit him again. In Valteria's office, the commander ordered him to surrender Alsace, his homeland, now under Valteria's rule. After hearing what sounded like a foolish command, Vorn sarcastically asked if Valteria was as stiff as her assistant's chest. But it turned out Valteria had other, more specific orders for him. In front of all the soldiers, Vorn was commanded to shoot an arrow as far as possible from the shooting arena. When his arrow missed, he realized it was a planned humiliation to mock him before the kingdom. But as he finally grasped the trick to control the broken bow, an assassin suddenly appeared, running along the wall, directly targeting the princess. With all his strength, Vorn shouted to Valteria to take cover. However, Valteria instead activated her phantasm bow ability, creating a whirlwind that shattered the arrows aimed at her into pieces. As the bandit tried to escape, Vorn asked his ally, Lisha, if he could provide assistance. Lisha, however, coldly replied that he would be useless. Unfazed, Vorn aimed from 300 meters away and released an arrow that struck the assassin's leg precisely. The soldiers watching were astonished, wondering how Vorn managed to control the bow they had previously damaged. Afterward, Valteria announced that the target practice was over and, with arrogance, welcomed him to become her servant. The next day, in Valteria's room, Valteria apologized to Vorn about the broken bow. In a serious tone, she said she would execute the 3 soldiers who had damaged the bow just to humiliate Vorn in front of everyone. However, Vorn pleaded for them to be forgiven, reasoning that it was merely a mishap with the weapon, though he could see a slight smirk on Valteria's face, as if she was enjoying his confusion. Valteria was surprised to see Vorn willing to plead for the lives of his own enemies. She began to think that Vorn was the only soldier brave enough among the Brunish troops. Deep down, she even admitted to herself that she was starting to like Vorn, especially since witnessing his skill in shooting arrows with extraordinary accuracy. Besides, the night before the battle, Vorn had meticulously scouted the enemy's position, even though they were outnumbered 25,000 to 300 soldiers. With his resilience, Vorn and his troops managed to wipe out the entire enemy force within half a day. Valteria was amazed by Vorn's courage in facing 7 soldiers alone. To her, killing humanity's best archer would be a great loss. So, she spared Vorn's life and asked him to become one of her servants. However, Vorn declined the offer, explaining that he still had a homeland to protect and people waiting for him to return. After leaving Valteria's office, Vorn approached a bald soldier and apologized to him for having to shave his head completely, making him look like a shiny stain. But the bald man responded proudly, saying that shaving his head was the greatest honor for him, especially after witnessing Vorn's incredible shot that saved the princess. As a redemption for damaging Vorn's bow, the bald soldier even vowed to keep his head shaved for life. At the same time, a maid secretly wished Vorn's arrow could pierce her deep within, while another maid daydreamed about receiving a shot to the face, each harboring slightly excessive admiration for Vorn's skills. In the following weeks, all the hunter soldiers were amazed by Vorn's ability to hit 3 targets at once. Many wanted to learn archery from him. However, other young men who felt challenged by him became jealous because Vorn had stolen their attention. Because of this, Vorn tried to find secluded places to practice and bathe alone, until one day he saw a baby dragon. But at that moment, he heard Valteria's voice as she was bathing, explaining that the small dragon was Luni, her loyal pet. Embarrassed to see Valteria bathing, Vorn lowered his head as if apologizing for disturbing her. But Valteria simply smiled at him, inviting him to turn around and join her. Later that night, Vorn was approached by the bald soldier, who informed him that they had captured a man from his kingdom. Vorn felt relieved when he saw Bertrand, his assistant, still alive. However, Bertrand quickly dashed his hopes, saying that it was not yet time to celebrate because Duke Felix's army was on its way to Alsace. Bertrand's words shook Vorn. He rushed toward the kingdom's gate, but his steps halted when Valteria appeared, teasingly asking where he was going. At the same time, Felix ordered his son to lead 3,000 soldiers toward Alsace, intent on crushing what he perceived as Vorn's weakness. Behind this ambition, Felix brought powerful dragons, ready to obliterate everything Vorn held dear. Zion, Felix's son, vowed to destroy everything and burn every fragment Vorn loved. Back at the palace, Vorn couldn't take his eyes off Valteria's slightly revealing attire. Valteria spoke softly yet sharply, telling him not to look away this time. Despite this, Vorn declared that he would return soon after defeating the enemy to save his people. Yet deep down, Vorn felt hesitant. He was just an archer facing 3,000 soldiers. Voltaria looked at him with skepticism, saying that if he wanted to die, he might as well do it here. Her words sounded cold, yet Vorn sensed disappointment behind them. Voltaria advised him to control his emotions, reminding him that unchecked emotions would only lead him to ruin. Vorn paused, realizing that Voltaria could have killed him at any time but chose not to. He began to think, perhaps this was his chance to save his kingdom. The thought stirred something in him, and Vorn started developing a plan in his mind. While others only saw him as a fool without strategy, Voltaria laughed at his bravery. But Vorn was curious why Voltaria laughed, even though his courage surpassed that of many soldiers. Finally, Voltaria offered her help in defending his country, but only if Vorn was willing to surrender all of Alsace and his loyalty. Reluctantly, Vorn agreed to the deal. Voltaria then raised her sword, commanding her troops to begin the assault on Alsace. Throughout the night, the forces moved swiftly, and Voltaria couldn't take her eyes off Vorn. Memories of the time Vorn came into the command room wearing armor without protection resurfaced. Lisha, another soldier, mocked him, considering his armor as useless as his face. But as Lisha started brushing his hair, there was something gentle in the way she wanted to make Vorn look his best before the final battle. Voltaria even gave him a side-parted haircut that drew attention. Vorn, slightly blushing, called her beautiful, boldly saying that if Voltaria were a sword, he would swallow her whole. On their journey, Vorn realized that their forces were outnumbered 3-1. However, he pointed out that he knew the terrain well. They could use the narrow points of the field to their advantage. Vorn promised to use every choke point, hinting at a clever strategy. That morning, Zion's army was only a few hours away from the kingdom. While all the residents of Alsace had been evacuated to the temple for safety, Tita chose to stay at the manor, wondering if Vorn would truly keep his promise to return someday. That's when Felix's forces began to invade the city, looting every building they encountered. Zion, disgusted by the sight of people taking refuge in the temple, finally found his main interest when he saw Vorn's manor. This should be entertaining, he thought as he stepped inside. Inside the manor, Tita prayed silently for Vorn to give her strength, then, with determination, ran down the stairs. But when Zion saw her, she ordered him to leave. Zion only laughed, saying he wasn't intimidated by her threats. He then reminded her of how he and Vorn grew up together, firmly stating that Tita was willing to risk her life to protect their home. His words angered Zion. He stepped forward and cut Tita's apron, warning that her legs would be next. Tita tried to reach for a dagger, but Zion quickly deflected it, even roughly tearing at her clothes. In her fear, Tita could only hope that Vorn would return soon. Hearing Vorn's name mentioned, Zion laughed mockingly, saying that Vorn would never return, and with a single motion, he pushed Tita to the floor. However, just as Zion was about to torment her, his mind was suddenly filled with Vorn's name. At that moment, an arrow suddenly struck Zion's hand, causing him to retreat. Vorn shouted for Tita to jump down. Swiftly, Vorn approached on his horse, dodging enemy attacks, and caught Tita before any further danger could occur. Voltaria arrived just in time, using wind magic from her sword to protect them. As they landed, Voltaria scolded Vorn for not valuing his life more. In that moment, Vorn finally realized that Voltaria's sword could control the wind. Voltaria explained that she had made a pact with the spirit Erifar, which granted her the power of wind. Vorn felt the wind swirling around him, as if it were his ally. However, Zion and his forces remained a threat. As they advanced, Vorn noticed Tita's torn clothing, and she explained that she had only been trying to save her bow. Tita sincerely expressed how happy she was for Vorn's return after so long. Seeing the two embracing, Voltaria felt a pang of jealousy, wondering if Vorn's type was a simple girl who often cried. Amidst the warmth of their reunion, an arrow suddenly flew toward them. With quick reflexes, Vorn caught it and fired back, striking the attacker's eye and ending his life. However, the action caused Vorn's hand to be injured from the strain, and Tita quickly used her skirt to bandage his wound. Though injured, Vorn was still ready to fight and ordered his troops to advance. But as Vorn prepared to follow, he realized that his bow had broken after his last shot. Tita suggested that Vorn use her sacred bow, reminding him of her father's story that the bow was a gift from the god of war. Vorn then gripped the bow, and as he drew the string, a powerful aura emanated from it, affecting the flow of natural energy around him. A few hours later, after 300 enemy soldiers had fallen, the remaining forces who had fled began to regroup. Amidst the situation, Voltaria met with the war commander. Voltaria wondered where they could set up camp, and Vorn pointed to a spot on the map he called the Malchium Plains. As the sun began to set, they arrived on the battlefield. Felix's troops were already in a seemingly solid formation, prompting the Zected forces to decide to place 400 cavalry soldiers at the front line to face them directly. Voltaria and Vorn stood at the front, ready to lead the charge. When Voltaria drew her sword, she immediately ordered her troops to advance. In the midst of the advancing forces, Felix's soldiers launched a rain of arrows. However, Volteria quickly released mana from her sword, deflecting the arrows as if the wind itself were shielding her. Vorn, who was nearby, aimed and released an arrow that struck down 3 soldiers at once. Volteria was impressed, thinking that Vorn's strength came from another world. She continued attacking the enemy's front line, cutting down soldier after soldier as she broke through their ranks. Meanwhile, Vorn stayed focused, shooting accurately until he managed to destroy Felix's flag, delivering a significant morale blow to the enemy. With Volteria urging her troops forward, Felix's forces mounted a counterattack. Amidst the fierce battle, Bertrand handed Vorn a new arrow for his next shot. Suddenly, a loud horn sounded, signaling Felix's forces moving into a new position. In the distance, a land dragon appeared before Volteria's troops. Volteria was stunned, wondering how Felix's forces, usually considered weak, had managed to tame such a terrifying creature. The dragon charged toward them with immense power, and 2 soldiers who attempted to fight it were immediately crushed by its brutal assault. Vorn prepared to attack the dragon but realized that its scales were harder than steel. Meanwhile, Zion's face appeared, grinning and saying that the dragon would tear them all apart. On the other side, Lisha and her troops had moved to attack the flank of Felix's forces, trying to halt their advance. However, Volteria pressed forward alone, determined to face the land dragon. When Vorn wondered about the technique Volteria was using, she explained that this was her strongest skill, one she never used against humans. At that moment, Zion, with a mocking and disdainful gaze, announced that additional forces from Felix's headquarters were approaching. Lisha immediately ordered her troops to retreat, but Felix's forces gave chase, feeling that they had the upper hand. Lisha signaled with a whistle for the next phase of their plan. Suddenly, ropes stretched across the hills were pulled tight, causing many of Felix's soldiers to fall from their horses. Before they could realize what was happening, Lisha's forces launched a counterattack, pushing the enemy back with surprising speed. Lisha realized that this success was only possible thanks to the support of the local people, who deeply respected and loved Vorn. With a grateful smile, Lisha felt proud to fight alongside someone so cherished by the people. At the same time, Volteria's troops launched another assault. However, as Volteria hesitated, unsure if this was the right moment, Vorn calmly informed her that it was indeed the perfect time for an ambush. Immediately, they released all their horses, deploying a surprising tactic to mislead the enemy. Meanwhile, a soldier reported to Zion that an enemy regiment was approaching from behind, numbering over 2,000 troops. Zion realized that with his own force numbering only about 600, victory seemed impossible. When one of his comrades suggested holding their ground, Zion punched him in the face, causing Zion to cry out in frustration. Even though the commanders around him knew Zion wasn't a worthy leader, they still ordered their troops to retreat. However, Zion was unaware that the Zected forces were only using 2,000 riderless horses to give the impression of a larger army. As Zion's knights began to pull back, Volteria's forces pressed the attack even harder. Eventually, Volteria's troops broke through the second cavalry line, scattering the main force of the enemy. As they drew closer, Vorn called out to Zion to surrender. Arrogantly, Zion mocked them and dismissed the townspeople as useless, then challenged Vorn to a duel. When Zion requested a spear, Vorn remained calm, saying that his bow would suffice. Vorn took the first shot, but Zion taunted him again. Undeterred, Vorn released the second and third shot at the same spot, and finally, with a precise final shot, Vorn's arrow pierced Zion's arm. Zion began to scream, shocked that he had been struck by the arrow. Volteria realized that Vorn had intentionally aimed at the same spot to penetrate Zion's shield. As Vorn prepared to aim again, Zion's soldiers rushed forward to protect their leader, sparking a clash between the two armies. Amid the chaos, suddenly, the dragon soared high into the sky, and when they realized Zion was fleeing, Vorn aimed his bow at the dragon. With the power and memories of Tida's suffering in his mind, Vorn released an arrow filled with mana, leaving everyone watching in awe. As the arrow struck the dragon, the enemy soldiers' morale shattered instantly. Volteria raised her sword, declaring that Vorn had successfully executed Zion. The next morning, after Tida prepared bread for her master, she woke up Volteria. While enjoying breakfast, Volteria talked about her plans to return to the capital, though she wasn't sure how she would stop the war. Meanwhile, in the Felix Empire, anger surged over their defeat. When a general asked how to eliminate Vorn and Volteria, Felix ordered the hiring of the notorious Cyrac assassins and planned to send another battle maiden to challenge Volteria. A few days later, King Victor announced that Volteria had been granted permission to continue the war. However, Volteria added that if the Alsace territory became part of her domain, she would claim it. When Lisha volunteered to scout the mansion, Volteria began explaining to Vorn that their greatest threat was Lowry, one of the battle maidens who Felix might deploy. But before Volteria could finish speaking, Lowry suddenly burst into the room. With confidence, Lowry introduced herself to Vorn as the bearer of the cleansing spear. Volteria quickly warned Vorn to stay away from Lowry, considering her dangerous. Lowry smiled and told Vorn that she only wanted to talk to him. Shortly after, the two headed into the forest together, but Volteria and Lisha decided to follow. Volteria even joked, saying she couldn't bear to let a woman like Lowry be alone with Vorn. On the way, Vorn began to wonder about Lowry's intentions. Lowry then revealed that she was an ally of Felix. Vorn realized that he probably couldn't win a battle against such a strong ally. However, during the journey, Vorn suddenly spotted a trap ahead. They quickly stopped their horses, starting to realize that their enemies might be assassins. As Volteria drew her sword, she immediately realized their target was Vorn, who had just dodged a poison arrow. The assassin then leaped to another tree, firing another poison arrow that Volteria deflected. Vorn then took an accurate shot, pinning the assassin to the tree. Noticing the tattoo on his body, Lowry recognized that the assassin was a Sarash. Shortly afterward, another assassin tried to attack them, but Lisha quickly blocked his strike and ended his life. Before they could react, a snake lunged, biting Lisha's side. Volteria swiftly slashed the snake, while Vorn managed to catch Lisha before she fell. At that moment, Vorn began to suck the venom from Lisha's wound to prevent the poison from spreading. As other assassins began to appear, Lowry activated Lavias, summoning an ice spear that flashed into existence, instantly immobilizing them. With one light thrust, Lowry took down the assassins, mocking Volteria as a useless loser for losing focus. Lowry then walked away. After that, Volteria, Vorn, and Lisha continued their journey to the nearest town. A few days later, after Lisha had fully recovered, Volteria informed her that Vorn had saved her life at great personal cost, and Volteria planned to give him a fitting reward. While Vorn was cleaning himself, he accidentally stumbled upon Lowry at the hot spring, preparing her spear with a resolve that looked as if she intended to end her own life.